The most widely published book in human history reveals that we are created in the image of God. Throughout our human journey, each encounter is an opportunity to see the shared humanity in ourselves and others. Regardless of one's views on religion, each experience and each story weaves us together towards a common path of transformation, a process of growth and understanding, a recognition that, at our core, we share a common destiny. What does the search for truth really mean in our lives? How can we find a sense of unity in a world so diverse and divided? As we reflect on these questions, we start to uncover a fundamental connection that binds us all beyond our differences. Welcome to Created in the Image of God, Building Vibrant Communities, with our host, Wade Franson. Tonight's episode is Kingdom Construction.
Good evening, everyone, or perhaps it's good morning for some of you if you're dialing in from Europe, or whatever time it is when you're watching. We have an amazing show prepared for you today. Kingdom Construction is about a man who wasn't supposed to survive. Scott Arias was on an oil platform explosion in Iraq, which could have ended everything. Instead, it sparked the beginning of something bigger. Today, Scott leads a national construction firm built from the ground up, not just with grit, but with God. Every brick of the company reflects his core belief, which is that faith without works is dead. Through military discipline, biblical principles, and a relentless sense of mission, Scott has turned his testimony into a professional calling. But this story isn't just about success for the sake of success. It's about leadership that serves, work that worships, and the power of building with eternity in mind. Welcome to the studio, Scott.
How you doing, Wade?
I'm doing great, although my camera just got blurry. I'm going to turn it off and on to get going here. But while I do that, to try to get it to unblur. But while I do that, tell us a little bit about where you're dialing in from and the weather down there, as we were just talking about.
Well, I'm in Lexington, Kentucky, so central part of Kentucky, and we were just talking about how the weather here has been extremely hot lately. So, love Kentucky, but boy, during a couple of weeks during the summer, it gets really hot.
Well, and we were talking about how your construction company doesn't necessarily focus just on local construction, but pretty much all over the place because it's grown over the years.
It has. So we went from myself as the founder in 2008 to 223 people currently, and they're all over the world. I mean, you name it. We've had people all the way from Greenland to Alaska.
Well, we'll get into that growth and success story here in a bit, but let's first talk about your creation story, as we always do here. Go back, all the way to the beginning. Who your parents were, the kind of world you grew up in, so that we can get to know a little bit about who you are at the core. So tell us about those very early years, your earliest memories, and the environment in which you became who you are.
Well, my mom and dad, my dad came to this country right after the Bay of Pigs from Cuba, and he spent a year in Miami, and then he shipped him, during that time they shipped, a lot of the Cuban refugees to the central parts of America. And my dad just happened to end up in New Mexico, and that's where he met my mother. And so they had 5 kids, and my dad worked and had his own small little janitorial business. And so I remember growing up from the early age of 5, wiping off tables, working with my mom and dad after school. And from that, I remember pushing a lawnmower and my dad screaming at me because that's how a father-son dynamic works sometimes. And so that, so I grew up in Albuquerque, New Mexico. I don't know if you've ever been there or not. I always tell people if if you've never been there, don't go. No, I'm just joking. It's the desert. Some people love the desert. I love Kentucky, and so I love the green rolling hills. Uh, so when I got to make choices of my own, I decided that I wanted to join the Navy. And my senior year of high school, through a lot of family dynamics, I ended up dropping out the last semester of my high school senior year, and I joined the Navy. So that kind of led to the path of my life from there on.
Well, quick question about that sort of dynamic with your father. Um, I'm of that perhaps same generation. Grew up in a line of men who were focused on work and not always expressing the most patience with their children. Believed that life was to be, you had to maybe toughen those sons up in particular. So do you think that dynamic that you mentioned about, your father occasionally yelling at you, maybe not mowing the lawn properly or not knowing how to use a lawnmower or not wanting to mow, whatever that was, um, did that affect your desire to go into the military, or where did that desire come from to go down the military route?
Well, I always tell people that that was my basic training for basic training. So so I was in the Navy, and then I was in the Seabees, more specifically, which is much more aligned with the Marine Corps than the Navy. So, and then being in construction, construction is a lot of tough people in construction, a lot of tough-minded, physically tough people. So that really, my growing up and my father treating me the way he had really fulfilled me from that, and made me appreciate that. Uh, Maybe appreciate it after I actually had to deal with that, because most of the people I went to boot camp with never had anybody scream at them, and for me, it really prepared me for how to contend with uh, difficult situations like that.
Well, so, given the world we live in, and I apologize for maybe digging into this a little bit too much, but again, it's of personal interest to me because I have my own son who's 14,
Mhm.
and from an age perspective, I could be his grandfather. So it's not that there's a generation gap. It's just that, my methods are not necessarily the methods of his fathers today because the world has changed so much. So as a man, what are the pros and cons of having had that experience growing up?
Well, I had to say, the pros is you learn how to kind of deal with things, uh, how to kind of take your feelings and put them behind you or inside you a little bit. And being in the military, that was a very important thing, especially when I traveled the Middle East. I mean, you can't be sensitive when people are firing at you. You know, you can't be sensitive, and pick up a guy's body part off of the ground. So you kind of have to put those emotions behind you and deal with them at another time. And I have to say that's very, very crucial. Probably extremely crucial to my success. But the downside of it is that you have to deal with that sooner or later. And honestly, it has taken me took me about 20 years to kind of put my arms around many things I saw, many things I had to do, dealing with, because I was at the very beginning of Operation Iraqi Freedom, Operation Enduring Freedom, and there was a lot of graphic, terrible things that I happened to see and happened to be part of, and that was a very, very difficult time. But so I had to say, it truly does. And I think about Gen Z, and that's who you talk about now is Gen Z. The Gen
No,
Zers, how do they
snowflake
really contend with
snowflake
that?
kids, right?
Yes.
So, first of all, let me say I, for one,
Yeah, and you know, that's a different dynamic.
Yeah, well, let me say on a personal level, I, for one, am deeply appreciative of what you did and your sacrifice and your contribution. Um, we're aware of it again if we're paying attention that certain decisions were made in recent weeks to deal with global threats, which risk the lives of millions of people. And of course, you have so called doves and so called hawks arguing about how to deal with some of those situations. But in my view, it takes a whole lot of courage, a whole lot of faith, a whole lot of willing spirit of sacrifice, a willingness to go in and literally risk your life for something that you believe in, not just because it's an ideology, but because you're connected to the other human beings that need that protection, need that defense, need those actions to be taken. And I get upset, not to reveal too much, when my daughter expects me to cook dinner for her because she's been working and is tired and doesn't show appropriate appreciation for the fact that, sure, I'll stop work right now and I'll go up and I'll cook dinner for you because I love you. And I'll get upset if not adequate appreciation is shown for that. So to just imagine dedicating one's life, risking one's life, and giving up what you've gave up and what you lost, and then to see a lack of appreciation often from those very people for whom you're doing it. That's got to be tough in some ways. So I wanted to express my appreciation first of all, not put you on the spot. Not here.
Well, I you know, honestly, um, I kind of take it the same way I kind of take my mission to, you know, build the kingdom in the same regard, you know, and it's just, it's not about me. It's about the greater good. I much appreciate people who appreciate me, but in the same regard, uh, you know, I was just fighting to stay alive and fighting for the person that stood right next to me, you know. And so, you know, you don't hear a lot of those political headwinds and everything when you're there. You're there to, and I'd say not just fighting for you and the person next to you, but also from the persecution of some people that you see around you. You know, I it upsets me sometimes when I hear people try to come to the defense of some people who are savages, and because you know the people I and the people that I was with cared about life, cared about people, and we wouldn't take a life if it wasn't necessary, and uh, that's you know, so that's pretty much all I can say about that. It's, you know, and I don't really think about it as I or anybody else did anything great. You know, at the end of the day, we were just trying to survive and help the people around of us survive.
Thank you so much for sharing some of that. Um, aside from the personal stress of that, you left a lot on that battlefield. We talked briefly beforehand, and after that explosion on the oil platform, your recovery was 11 months. And then what is recovery, right? You weren't restored fully to what you were in that sense before, but what did you lose and what did you gain through that 11-month experience of rehabilitation and coming back from that near death experience?
Well, first of all, 12 surgeries, one lost limb, a collapsed lung, and a whole bunch of other damage. A lot of scars, compound femur fracture. So there was a lot of loss there. But in the same token, it was the what I gained was a better perspective on, you know, God's role in my life. And you know, I grew up a Christian. I grew up in the Catholic Church, and I was actually an altar boy growing up. If anybody who knows me, they'll laugh because it's kind of like. But I also got to remind people that I may have been an altar boy, but I also been a construction worker and a sailor for years. So um, uh, sometimes the way I talk doesn't always match my actions. But hey, you know, I'm working on it. You know, so
Right. What is it that James says? If any man can control the tongue, he is a master, right?
yes.
And some of us, you know, have perhaps been put in circumstances that make that a little more difficult than for others.
Well, I find it easier to walk than to talk sometimes.
Hmm.
So walk it, and I don't know how it is for different people, but for me, actually walk my faith, and sometimes my talk is the thing that is my side,
Interesting.
and um, we are all a model that of trying to be perfect, and that'll never be achieved, but we can always strive.
Well, I think that's a good segue to go to the first commercial break, which is actually a video, a little bit about you and what you're doing now. When we come back, we'll talk about that post-recovery period, you know, the idea that launched the business that you now run, and how that all came about. So don't go anywhere. We'll be right back with more with Scott Arias and Construction Kingdom.
Meet Dr. Scott Arias, a combat veteran, visionary entrepreneur, and construction industry powerhouse. Scott's journey began in 1994 when he enlisted in the U.S. Navy, a CB Senior Chief, 8-time Recruiter MVP, and Recruiter of the Year in the 2000s. He's lived and breathed service. After a devastating motorcycle accident and an oil platform explosion in Iraq, Scott didn't slow down. Post-retirement, Scott shifted focus, earning a PhD in construction management and educating the next generation at Eastern Kentucky University. As founder and CEO of ACE Consulting, he's built an Inquire's 5,000 award-winning firm, trusted nationwide for construction excellence in staffing, safety, and quality control. He's a published author, board member, community leader, and still finds time for charity work and weekend renovation projects. Now working on his third book and exploring new acquisitions, Scott Arias continues to build, not just structures, but legacies. Dr. Scott Arias, veteran, leader, builder, inspiration. Stay connected with him on LinkedIn.
Wow. It's so awesome to consider, you know, what we just talked about, that 11 months of rehabilitation, and then having gone on to create and build and lead something like that. I want to first ask about getting that PhD. How essential was the education part of this?
Well, you know, as I mentioned earlier, I was a high school dropout. You know, so it's kind of funny because, you know, it's wonderful what Jesus will do with people. You know, take Moses and send him to the most powerful person in the world and say, "Let my people go." For me, I am a paradigm breaker. You know, and I dropped out of high school, and my education was important to me because of that experience, and I focused on it, and ultimately led to my, I have 5 degrees. I have a PhD, a master's, 2 bachelors, and 2 associates, and my thirst for knowledge really had to do with the fact that some people say I had a chip on my shoulder. I don't necessarily believe that. I just believe that I know what I wanted to do, and I needed that. I needed those credentials to do it.
So while you were getting those academic credentials, was it all study before you launched, or were you doing this while you were building the construction business?
So everything in my life has been simultaneous. So I didn't go to college right out of high school. I didn't go to college right after the Navy. I did it while I was in there. In fact, I remember sitting on those Iraqi oil platforms taking federal income tax accounting. And so those are back in the day. We snail mailed work back and forth to the professor. And so once a week, I'd go to the ship, send out mail with all my homework. And I remember sitting on top of a Conex box in the Persian Gulf doing income tax accounting work. And that was actually the worst grade I ever got in my academic career. But it was a C plus. I say C plus because it makes me feel better if I just say C, But it is a C plus. But it was the hardest course because of the circumstances I was in. So I worked all day. It was 120 degrees out there, and then at night my hand was stick to the paper as I would actually write down and do the calculations and go through and write where the federal tax codes are. And it made me really appreciate my education and what I had to do to earn it rather than just be given it. And I say given it because that's not fair, but nowadays it's much more expected. Parents pay for college education. Well, my parents didn't have those means. And then I wasn't ready either. So the person who paid for my college was Uncle Sam, between Uncle Sam and my own pocketbook. So during this entire time, I have 4 kids, and during raising 4 children, I should say my wife raising 4 children because I was traveling the world, but raising 4 children, being in the military, doing this during a wartime environment, but I'm a big no excuses guy, and that's, I believe.
You froze up there for a second, but I think you're back now. I think we got most of that. So then were you continuing your education during the rehab or after the rehab? When did you complete the PhD?
Well,
Assuming that was the capstone.
actually, yeah. So I lost my leg in 2002, and then I actually, long story, but multiple different surgeries, most of it different things. So, and I was going through college, spent 18 years going to school. And so during this entire time of building the business and teaching and being in the military, having to be retired, going through the surgeries, I remember I was trying to take Calculus 1 when I was actually on narcotics still for after my accident, and how difficult that was.
Yeah.
So once again, it makes you appreciate the sacrifice you had to go through in order to achieve that.
So then tell us a little bit about how your faith plays into this and what some of the principles are from the Bible, from your faith, that are built into the way you conduct the business. And how does that differentiate you, both good and maybe bad, in the sense that maybe it makes it a little more difficult on the front end, I would assume, in some cases, though I believe that in the end, following the laws of God always pays off in the long run. But it's often, in my view, a little harder to get going in a world that doesn't respect it.
True. That's absolutely truth. And that's one of the driving forces why my business is a Christian organization. The vision for my company is we're in the business of building the kingdom. And people say, well, I thought you do construction, staffing and construction admin and construction training and construction security. Well, yeah, I do all those things. But at the end of the day, the why is my vision, and the why is to build the kingdom. I mean, that's why I wear the fish everywhere I go. That's why I attach my company name to the fish, because it just reminds me that I didn't get here by myself. I mean, it was a very intentional step that I would make. I was very deliberate in trying to open my ears to listen to what God told me, path to walk down, or if I felt like that the path I was walking down wasn't the right one, to change and pivot to something different. So related to the business. So when I started the business, my faith was strong, but my faith had, I was also dealing with a lot of different things, and personally and professionally, and I had to put my I had to put my faith. I had to put something in something that was a rock, something that wouldn't just go away. And I just decided that from day one that my company was going to be a Christian organization. And then a few years later, I decided that we needed to go above and beyond and dedicate 10% of what our earnings were, our net profits were, to building the kingdom. And I don't like to advertise it. In fact, most of the things that we do, well, we don't advertise it. Most things that we do behind doors. And find an individual to help, and we help them. A Christian foundation, using them to help fund many of the different charities and different items that we want to do. And so, this year we'll give $550,000 away. We're scheduled to, and I always tell people, my job is to do a lot of damage to the devil. And every day I wake up, I think of it just like I do a war, because that's what we're in. We're in a war, and I'm fighting for Jesus, just like I fought for the United States of America. And so I get up every day, and my fight now is real simple. I use my time, my treasure, and my talent every day to build the kingdom. And that could take the form of, we just had a gentleman who his father passed away, and he's used to be an employee of ACE, and now his son is an employee of us, and we're paying for his funeral. Not because we have to, but because we want to, because we get the opportunity to do something good. And why? Because Jesus loves me, and the only way I know how to express it is by showing that love to others. And there's something infectious about that. If you ask my company and you run around, we're going to be in the Inc. 5000 best places to work, and on the Inc. 5000 fastest growing companies, and this year. And there's a reason why, and that's because we put God above all else. And it's easy to get lost in the dollars and cents of the world, but at the end, it doesn't matter. As many people say, that you never see a U-Haul behind a hearse, and that is truth. Can't take it with you, so you might as well do the most with it as you possibly can for the benefit of God. And I think my mission is to love God. In order to love God, you got to love people, and that's what I try to do every day.
Awesome. So I'm getting that sense of some of the things that you do, and the dedicating of the portion of the income and whatnot to, let's call, humanitarian good works, helping. Share with me an example or two about how your faith creates rubber meets the road differences within your company on a day-to-day basis. So what do you do differently in going about the core business that you have, of this construction training and staffing, versus a company that might be in the similar industry but doesn't have that focus, that vision of constructing the kingdom?
Well, I'm glad you asked that question. That's where you're right. It's where the rubber meets the road, is where on a daily basis, day by day, how are you living that out? So when I walk up the steps to my office, there's we have a banner up on the wall, and it has our core values, and our core values are real simple. It has our vision, mission, and our core values. Our vision is in the business of building the kingdom. And then our mission is, using our Christian values, we make our clients' needs easy. And then our core values are, do the right thing, tying back to, the whole concept of morality and making those right choices, being the gold standard, because I think that's what God would want from us. each individual one of those that are on the wall, and then we do it in a manner that is expeditious, so because urgency is huge in construction. So, and every single one of those. Then you walk to the top of the stairs, and you see a conference room. We have 3 different offices, and in every single conference room we have a Bible sitting there, NIV version of the Bible. We start every meeting with a prayer. We go over our core values, what they mean, and what they mean to us, and what are we doing. And then we take it a step further, and we actually look at things we do internally. So we do many things for our staff beyond what we do externally. Most of our funds, actually 450,000 of our funds this year, are going to be going to external people and organizations. Internally, we put aside about 100,000 to do things good for the people within our organization. That's much easier because those people, and it's much more easier, and it's much more satisfying because they're there. But it's also a reminder that it's not what I'm doing, it's what Jesus is doing for you. And the reason I do it is because that's my mission in life. So, we're a construction firm. Even though we're a professional services firm, we're a construction firm. So we still mess around with each other. I'm a big prankster, so I like playing pranks because I'm a serious that joy is one of the things that more Christians need to show. I mean, we should show them going to heaven. If we're going to heaven, even if we don't wake up tomorrow, it's a good day still. And so that's that. Those are just some ways that we try to live those out. The external, we also opened up what we call a 5% club, where our employees have a chance to contribute towards these charities and stuff too. And I personally don't look at it, because whether we admit it or not, we all quote unquote will judge, based on that. I have somebody else manage that, so I don't have foresight of it. But the way we treat each other, the way we talk to each other at night, I'll Teams message one of my staff. If there's one of the standing rule in my company is if anybody has any family issues or has any things that happens in their life, I want to know about it immediately, because I want to see what I can do to help them. So that's the first question I have. If you have father has had a heart attack, or recently we've had a gentleman that is probably one of the most Christ-like individuals in my company, and him and his wife lost a baby after she carried it full term. And from those things, it's what you do and what you do for those people. And it may be simply as, hey, how are you doing? How can I help you? What can I do for you? And it means a lot, because I've been in those places where, my father passed away at 54, and he reaches out to you and says, hey, how are you doing? Really. And that's what I try to do. The company thing is great, but it'll take care of itself, because if you take care of people, those things take care of themselves. So I don't put a lot of focus on that. I put a lot of focus on people. And I think that's what differentiates us between many other organizations. It's not just a way to make money. This is a way to change the world.
Well, we're going to go to a commercial break. I have one more question before we go. When we come back, we'll talk about whether there was an inflection point. Often there's a sort of, if this were a Hollywood movie, there would be a point in time where you almost lost the company before you had a breakthrough. That's obviously a Hollywood moment. I don't know if there was a time really like that, but perhaps it was an inflection point. We'll ask that when we come back. But before we go to break, you just mentioned your dad. And I was going to ask earlier if he was still alive and what your relationship was like, but it sounds like you lost him when he was 54. Did I understand that correctly?
That's correct.
So how was that for you, and how did that affect you?
Well, and I was a very young man. I was in my early 20s, and it really, at the time, I didn't really understand the full grasp of that. But as I get older, because I'm 50 now, and I realize, boy, that's young.
Yeah.
And it made me appreciate things much, much more. And he was I remember my father. One of the things, and I know we're very good to go break. One of the real quick stories. My dad was, worked as a janitor, and many taxes is always a difficult thing for a business, and he struggled, paying taxes and being able to feed his family too. But he always would make would take a break at the Catholic church right down the street from where we worked, and I'd go with him many times, and he would just go in there just to pray. And now older, I realized what he was doing. He was saying, I'm not strong enough to do this, God, without you. I need you. And he would walk out of there, and he would attack life like I try to attack life every single day today. It's worth, gusto and energy.
Well, I know we are going to break, but I have to now share just a little personal anecdote. In the last several months, because I mentioned I'm older, right? I could be my son's grandfather. God blessed me richly with family in my later years, and I had this. I'm working with my son, and I'm trying to teach him about good. We moved out onto our property a couple of years ago, 7 acres. So we have chickens, we've got raised bed gardens, we've got actual work to do now, which they didn't have when they were younger, living in the city.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm trying to teach him things that I feel like I wished I would have tried to teach him a few years earlier. You know what I mean? And so that's where some of that stress comes in. It's like, really, you don't know how to lift up a board and you're 14? You know what I mean? I'm exaggerating for effect, but there's this sort of general sense of work, right? Physical work, being work wise. And I took him aside and I said, and my son's name's Caleb. I said, Caleb, some of what I'm doing is trying to teach you to, learn how to take care of yourself, because I've had to learn to take care of myself. But I said, I want you to know that when I'm stressed and I think I can't do it, I go to God. He's my father. He's the one that I get advice for. I'm here for you. I'll always be here for you until I'm not. And I want you to know that that's where you will then need to go for help. And I'm convinced that in the weeks following that, this was fairly recently, maybe a month and a half ago, there was a turnaround. Just sort of making that connection to dad has a dad. And that's where I go when I need help and strength. It's the very thing that you just said. But, I had the ability to still be here after age 55 and try to pass that on to my son in words. But it sounds like you learned it through his example and seeing him. And my dad was actually the same way. My dad was a, faithful man. We kept the Seventh-day Sabbath, but we used to get up. We were Christians, but for whatever reason, Seventh Day, he was a single dad at this point. He would get up at 6 a.m. on Saturday so that we could be ready to leave at 7 to set up the chairs in the hall where we met, because it was a rented hall. And the bathrooms had to be clean because it was like the Teamsters Union or something, and it was smelled like cigars and the bathrooms were horrible. And he was there cleaning this up and set up there as a single dad, dragging his son and daughter along with him to do that. And the power of that example was just amazing. So thank you for sharing, those moments about your dad as well. And obviously all of that plays into the success that you're having. When we come back, we're going to talk about that inflection point, if it did or didn't exist with you in building your business, and learn a little bit more about how it's going now and what the world is giving back to you as you continue to learn and grow through what you're doing in constructing the kingdom. Don't go anywhere. We'll be right back with more of Scott Arias.
Can ethics and economics really be connected? Once united, these two sciences drifted apart, but now a new approach brings them back together. In Ethical Economics for Today and Tomorrow, Bruce Kerber introduces 16 guiding ideas to show us how ethics can guide our choices and how economics can keep us grounded in reality. Imagine a system where economic choices are grounded in ethical principles, a system where ethics and economics test and refine one another. This book is a lens to understand history, evaluate civilizations, and challenge today's ideologies. Rediscover a world where values shape our economic choices, offering a powerful alternative to moral relativism. Ethical Economics for Today and Tomorrow by Bruce Kerber. Get your copy now and explore the unity of economics and ethics for a better future.
Welcome back to Creating the Image of God with Scott Arias. We're talking about constructing the kingdom. Just sort of a plug for Bruce Kerber's book there. We've had him on the show here. He did an episode for about 5 months, once a month, talking about those principles. And I find it interesting because I remember constantly trying to sort of get him to leave the theory for a second and give us practical examples. And he's like a really astute, logical, philosophical mind that has constructed the theories and built this beautiful model. But he didn't, he struggled a little bit in saying, kind of relating that to real world experience. So for those who remember Bruce Kerber's episodes, you're now talking to somebody who has put Bruce Kerber's principles into action without having read Bruce's book, I assume. But what you're doing is actually building out and living those very principles of integrating ethics and economics. And when he uses ethics, it's a very spiritual thing about how God created us and the intrinsic value in human beings and how he put his creative power in us and gave us this planet to tend and keep the garden and to make it productive in a holistic way. And that this is the foundation of all economics. And when we become untethered to those grounding principles, that's when we get way off and damage is done to millions of people based on following false ideologies. But to me, the rubber has to meet the road. The proof is in the pudding. The theory might sound brilliant, but does it work, right? And so Scott, tell us a little bit about, was there an inflection point? Was there a moment of challenge where, you were tested in your vision to see, oftentimes I find God wants us to show him that we really mean it and that we're going to stick to it no matter what, the dark side of things the enemy throws at us, and in an effort to thwart the very thing that we're trying to do in service to God.
Well, there's a reason that inflection points are in movies, in every single movie, is because they actually do occur a lot of times. And for myself, I have a personal inflection point and I had a professional one. Actually, I had two professional ones I'll share with you. The first one is after I lost my leg and I was going through all the recovery and dealing with, prescription drug addiction and yeah. So add to my resume of being a high school dropout, I was a drug addict too, so, and so, but, I attempted to commit suicide. I went to the garage and sat in the car and started the car up and sat there, and hoped I would die. And then I don't know. I can't explain it. And I guess that's reason why I feel like God was talking to me is I just felt a sense of peace. And I just felt this overwhelming, and I feel it. I'm feeling it right now. I feel tingling, that where he said, everything's going to be all right. Let me take the wheel, literally, and you just get up every day and do the best you can. And I took that and I have run with my life with that motto. I can't say that it has not haven't had to deal with, uh, you know, issues like that since that time. But I can tell you that has been a pivotal point of my life, and pretty much has made me put aside things that most of the world care about, And so that was one personally. Professionally, I had two, and I'll work backwards here. 2020, when COVID happened, I got my entire executive management staff together. We were in different locations at the time when it kind of hit, and I got them on a call. And the first thing I did is I prayed for probably about 10 minutes with my staff, and I said, you know what? We don't know what this circumstance is and how it's going to play out. We just asked for your guidance and all that. And then I left my management staff with the thought that I need you to come back tomorrow and bring something to the table, how we're going to navigate our way through this. So they all went away. We came back, and they provided me many different options to do. And what do we do as human beings? We undervalue God. I always laugh because I was in Walmart at my lake house a couple weeks ago for my family vacation. We do once a year, and I was looking over at the register, and I saw this. It's actually, you can see it's a little Jesus, right? And it was sitting on like the register back there. And then fast forward another week and a half, and I'm getting my hair cut yesterday, actually. And a lady said, hey, a lady came by and she's passing these out. Do you want one? And I was like, absolutely, I want one. But sometimes I think the problem with this is that we think we could put Jesus in our pocket, and I do put him in my pocket. Many, and I plan to put him in my pocket, and I have had him in my pocket, but he's not that simple. It's not as simple as, hey, you could just something you can put in your pocket and walk around with. It's far more complex than that. He's far bigger than that. And I think we undersell him. And so that's what, my staff came back and they undersold him, because they said, okay, well, let's make cuts. Let's do this, let's do that. And I thought about it, and I spent another night thinking about it and praying on it. And then I came back the next day and I said, folks, we're supposed to give 10% away this year, but we're going to do something different. We're going to put it in God's hands. We're going to give 15%. And we're going to say, you know what, God, we're doubling down on you. We know we have you on our side, and we know that people, that your blessings will chase us down and tackle us. So you know what, we're just going to double down on you and let the chips fall where they may. Well, the chips fell where they may, and we made the Inc. 5000. So we grew 20-some% that year. And I'm not saying that you give to get, or you pray to get, or whatever. But you know what, God showed God showed through in that case. And it wasn't through me. It was through me, but it wasn't me. And in hindsight, I look at that, and that it took a lot of faith on our behalf. But for him, it was just really a simple thing. It was just waiting on me to do the right thing. So that was one. And the other one was when we decided to give 10% of our net profitability beyond our personal, ties. That was a tough decision, because anybody who started tithing, it's tough, especially when you're struggling to pay your bills or do whatever. And we just, me and my wife decided, we're going to do it. And it was in November of that year, and I remember it specifically. And we made the decision, we went forward, and I had the busiest month that we've ever had in a company's history. And about halfway through December, I was still trying to work my way out of the mounds of work that got sent my way. And I looked at my wife and I said, do you think if Jesus would slow it down if I only give him 5%? No, and my wife says, it doesn't work that way, Scott, but it just shows you how, like, we put him in a box, put him in our pocket, when in reality, he's much bigger than that. And so those were personal, professional inflection points that really have really put me where I'm at today and where my company.
Yeah, and thank you for sharing those. Those are powerful stories. I'm going to throw a question at you that's maybe a little bit challenging. This for me is kind of a thorny, somewhat theological question. But when you mention Jesus and having him in your pocket and whatnot, um, and it being so much more complex than that, there, I've certain verses or passages jump into my awareness and occupy my mind for a time over the course of my life. There have been different ones. I've written books. Like the second book I wrote is called The Hardness of the Heart, because I was going through a very horrible divorce. I mentioned I've got children older. It's such a blessing,
Mm-hmm.
but go back 20 years and I was going through this brutal, gut-wrenching divorce that just about destroyed me emotionally, morally, physically, spiritually. It was so awful. And I didn't understand how or why this was happening to me, because I dedicated my life to trying to avoid that very thing, because I was the victim of divorce in the sense that my dad kidnapped us as children, smuggled us out of the country to Sweden, and it just devastated my life and put me through the ringer. And I'm like, I'm never doing that. That's never happening. Well, of course, the minute you say that, God's going to test you. But it's not that simple either. I don't want to make it one dimensional. The point is, I was struggling with it, and I was really focused on this issue that, they tested Jesus over this topic. And he said, yeah, Moses allowed divorce because of the hardness of your heart. But from the beginning, it was not so. And I spent a lot of time focused on trying to go back to the beginning. What is the original intent of male-female relationships, and even our relationships with each other, and the idea of rulership and submission because of, the husband is the head of the wife and all that stuff. What did I do wrong? What didn't I understand? How should I have been more Christ-like in my relationship to have saved it? All that stuff. The point is, long tangent, what's been occupying me recently is this statement that Jesus, it says, learned obedience through the things he suffered. And couple that with the fact that when he walked through the Garden of Gethsemane, he literally prayed, Father, let this cup pass. But, nonetheless, if it be your will, I'll go ahead and drink it. And to me, he didn't just do that. I've heard sermons where, Jesus was just saying that for the benefit of his disciples. I don't think so. I think he was really asking God, hey, there's got to be another way. Didn't you provide a ram? This is my conjecture, right? Jesus knew the scriptures. Didn't you provide a ram for Abraham? Where's the ram that's going to substitute for me? Are you really going to make me go through with this? Because Abraham didn't have to do it. Isaac didn't have to do it in the end. You provided. Where is it? Where's the provision here, right? Come on. I'm waiting. This is my inflection point. I'm waiting for the rescue. I think those were thoughts that were going through his mind. But who am I? But it doesn't make sense any other way to me, especially this idea that he learned obedience. Why did Jesus need to learn obedience? I mean, he was the Son of God, born of a virgin. You know what I mean? And he learned obedience. So he had to go through the suffering, not only to save us, but because he kind of wanted the cup to pass. And in the end, he learned through it. So, I mean, I guess I'm asking you for your thoughts on some of that in terms of these inflection points and the suffering that you've gone through in your own life and the things that you've learned in your own. How does any of this resonate in terms of your journey, both the triumph and the tragedy and the triumph, your near death and your resurrection now to a successful, celebrated in a sense, businessman, doing it all in service to God, learning obedience in a way, really committing yourself day after day to doing things in total submission and servitude to God.
So the funny thing, you mentioned something that just rang true with me, is that, the toughest prayer I've ever prayed, and the prayer that I prayed today, I started praying about 8 years ago. And actually, I remember a road outside my house, and I was on my drive between here and the university when I taught at the university was about an hour, and I used that time to kind of between me and Jesus. And the prayer simply is, this is what I want. This is I 100% appreciate what you've done for me, Jesus, but I want this too. And but when you turn it around and you say, and I went to church one weekend, and the pastor said, I don't know if you know who Mike Bro is, but he pretty famous pastor. He one of the largest churches in America, which is like 5 minutes down the street from me. And he said his granddaughter was praying for one of her friends that came down with leukemia, and saying, God, please, save my friend. And then in his heart, though, he knew that the toughest prayer is to say, God, I want this to happen, and I ask for your, mercy, but at the end of the day, let your will be done. And that is what was, and to say, you know what, at the end of the day, that's it. I want your will to be done. So I do a lot less asking and a lot more, let your will be done, whatever that may be. And that's tough because, as I shared before the show, came down with shingles 2 years ago, and I'm still suffering with it. I've had it in the worst place most people can have it, and that's in my eye. I mean, I was down and out in a room for about a month, couldn't even open my eyes. And I remember I went to my bathroom, opened my eyes one day, and I couldn't see on my left eye, and it scared me to death. But you know what? Through those moments, Jesus shows through. And because people watch, I always say your children hear what you say, but watch what you do, because that's what they do. They look at what you do every day, and you can you can say whatever you want, but at the end of the day, it's what you do in your actions that they really, really watch very closely. And my kids, I don't know how your kids are, but my kids can spot a hypocrite really, really easy. And we're all hypocrites to a certain degree. And, but that's a tough prayer to pray, because I don't want to be sick. I've been sick. I've been through 20 some surgeries in my life. I've been through shingles. I've been through, phantom pain in my leg. I struggle with it for the last 20 years dealing with pain. In fact, right now, as I sit here today, I have a nerve stimulator in my leg that's infected, and that I'm dealing with. But that's part of it, and all you can do is do the best of what was given, and let him, praise him, and I'll share with you the one last thing before I send it back to you, Wade, is that one time I had my executive team write their obituaries.
Wow.
And, you always hear that happening in college and stuff. And I had done it in the school with my students, and I wrote my obituary. And one thing is that after a long illness, Scott Arias died at the age of 70. And that's how I started off. And then the guy sitting left to me, which is a very great guy, he's like, why would you want that? And I said, I don't want that. But at the end of the day, I want to bring more people to him. And if it's through my sacrifice that I got to do it, then so be it, And that's a hard thing, especially in the world that we live in every day. And it resonates beyond, the physical implications. It's the financial implications. For me, it's not the finances, the hard thing. It's the time, because, you talk your treasure, talent, and your treasure, your talent, and your time. And time is a tough one for me because I have a tendency to be a little selfish with my time. So I have to be aware of that, and I have to be conscious of that. And through situations like that, maybe I will bring somebody to him.
Wow. We talked in the studio right before the show about towards the end of it, maybe talking about death. And that's where you brought it. And the reason I said that is that I was sharing that on Sunday mornings we go to a nursing home, and my wife and I, and we're working with some of the residents there. And it's a strange thing. The reason we went there to visit with them and to share with them and to talk about the Bible. One woman in particular from the Bahamas, deep and abiding interest in the Bible, wanted people to come talk about it, wanted to build a spiritual community. But we've had several of the people in that facility pass on to the next world while we've been doing this for the last 2 years. And it's really been educational about preparing people for that moment. And I just find it fascinating that you did that obituary thing. So how did that play out for others as well? How was that received, and what did people take away from that?
Well, hopefully, the takeout for everybody that I had, and my intention was, whether I drove it home or not, was it's bigger than what it is than what we're doing today or tomorrow, you know? So death is a hard thing, especially when you witness it in the ways I've had to unfortunately witness it. And I understand that that's necessary to take that next step, but it's scary. It honestly, to this day, it's still a little scary to me. And I have about 7 months ago, I lost my 13-year-old dog. So don't have a lot of close friends, because many men who don't have a lot of close friends, they have a lot of acquaintances. I have a lot of friends, but I don't have a lot of close friends. And that dog served as my friend, very, very close friend. And she sat in the corner of this room. In fact, at the desk I'm sitting at right now, her bed was right here. And it was really hard for me. And I tried to distract myself using tangible things, using work, using everything. But I eventually had to have come to terms with it. And what I realize is that that's the transition that has to occur, and we all have to prepare for it. And it looks different for all of us. But at the end of the day, we have to be conscious of the consequences of the way we live every single day. And still to this day, it scares me, just because not scares me like I'm afraid per se, because I know what's on the other side. I shouldn't say I know, because none of us know for sure, but I have faith on what it is on the other side. And I had to say, that's one thing that has shaped my life, is seeing the graphic nature. It's not like you see on TV about World War II. It's not like that. It's much more graphic than that, and it's it's very, very real. And
well,
I wish I could put words to it.
So in addition to the oil platform, there was this thing in the video about a motorcycle. Just tell us briefly about that, because I want to share one story, because it's just now occurring to me why maybe death is on my mind. But I want to know a little bit about that motorcycle situation with you.
Well, so I almost lost my life on a motorcycle too. So either I'm accident prone or just lucky, I guess. I don't know what it is, but I went through recovery from that, and then I fell through the oil platform, got seriously hurt after an explosion that occurred through a dhow that was trying to blow up with this oil platform in the Persian Gulf. And so that was the situation. A motorcycle, I was just driving down a 2-lane road, and a lady came across the center line, hit me head on. And that was a very trying time for me also, because that was not an easy recovery either.
Yeah. So the reason I brought that up is just about 2 months ago, my younger sister was killed in a motorcycle accident.
Oh, terrible.
And she struggled with addictions her whole life. I mentioned the kidnapping. She got the worst of it. She was the youngest. It affected her the most deeply, being taken away from her mother when she was 5 years old, and then just a lot of stuff. So she struggled in her relationship with God, with men, with others generally. there were alcohol issues in her life and whatnot. Um, you might say she was, maybe or likely not reconciled with God. And so in I had a woman on the show talking about the prodigal son, the prodigal father, in that prodigal son story, about how the father meets the son a long way off. And it struck me that guaranteed the last thoughts in my sister's life were of God. In that moment, and it was the same thing, right? It was a person under the influence that crossed over the line, actually turned right in front of her on a 2-lane road, said to the police he thought he could make it, and killed her, and arraigned, indicted, whatever, out on bail. That's still ongoing there, but um, guaranteed in that moment, you know how quickly your mind can race when she perceived what was happening right before the impact or whatever. Guaranteed her thoughts turned to God, right? In whatever sort of hanging upside down in a well kind of way, they turned to God. And just like that prodigal son turned to the father rushes out to meet him while he is yet a long way off. That's what occurred to me. That in that moment, God the Father rushed out to meet my sister while she was a long way off, because her thoughts in that moment turned to God. She turned towards him. And that's all it takes. You hear about deathbed repentances and whatnot. That's, to me, I've always said, oh yeah, come on, deathbed repentance. How real can that be? It doesn't matter how real your repentance is, because what's real is the love of the Father. What's real is the love of the Father. And you've demonstrated that. What's real is Jesus. What's real is the law of God, which is based on love. And no father gives his son a fish, a serpent, when he asks for a fish. And God, chastens every son whom he loves. But then in the end, he rushes out to meet the prodigal children. So, that just reinforced the fear of the no need for fear of death, because of recognizing the love that the Father has, his desire to be reconciled and reunited with us. We're all separated from him on this world. We're created in his image with that divine spark and the capabilities to develop the spiritual qualities that are needed in the next world. And we're in the womb today. We're going to be born again. In my view, that word is begotten. We're begotten of God today. We're not actually born of God. We are begotten of God. We are impregnated with the Holy Spirit. But we have not yet been delivered. The rebirth has not happened. We are growing in the womb, but we are truly born again when we pass through the matrix to the next life. And the Father is right there, the first thing to pick up that crying child. All of this is kind of fresh on my mind in both a raw way, but also a wonderful way, as I'm just chewing on this and trying to grasp the love of God, how profound it really is. And, we spend a lot of time talking about fathers and the relationship with fathers, and our worldly fathers may yell at us and I may yell at my son. God doesn't actually yell at us. Lightning and thunder and earthquakes, that's God yelling, but it's not really God yelling. You know what I mean?
Well, I had to say, when we think about death, and this is what I've kind of come around to start believing, is that we focus so much on the death and not what happens immediately afterwards, which is far more important and far more consequential, than how we go. So, I keep on telling myself, if you really believe, then why are you afraid? and I will still struggle with that in my life, and I will work on that. But just because of, like I said, I have death looks like, because I've seen it
Yeah.
up close, and that's not a fun thing.
Yeah. Well, we're out of time. It's just been so fascinating and so wonderful talking to you. We didn't really engage much with the audience comments. I'm going to copy them and send them to you so you can see them all if you haven't been looking at them at all. I'll just show a couple of them real quick. Liquid Church, in talking about some of the comments you were making earlier on about perhaps worrying a little bit about death. I do the same, but realize there's no other option if we want to be with him in paradise. Earlier than that, there were, comments about you building the business from our friends up at Planksip. I love how you've integrated your faith first into your company. And Stella, my parents used an unethical builder. They ended up going to court. They did not have Christian values. That's construction workers, used car salesmen. They're, people that tell those stories. And to have somebody on who's so focused on ethics and faith and prayer and doing things right, it's pretty awesome. Maybe we'll just conclude with this and allow you to comment on Angelo's comment here. I thought we were born again when we confess with our mouths out loud that Jesus is Lord and that he rose from the dead. Any comments on that? I can add a comment of it here in a moment.
Well, that's a struggle for me, because growing up in the Catholic Church and then crossing over to being in a non-denominational church I'm in now, two different baptismals and dedications and confirmation and all those different things. For me, it's just I think I don't know, me personally, I do agree that it's a choice. It's a when you make that choice to realize that Jesus Christ is my Lord and Savior, that life changes. I heard my pastor once said, why wouldn't you live your entire life gambling and having a good time and doing all the things that you shouldn't do, and at the last moment you pray for the kingdom and pray for entrance to the kingdom, but then you miss out on the joy.
Have you seen how much fun
with
gamblers
him in it.
really have? I mean, come on. It's like, I
Well,
remember going, and I've never been I shouldn't say never, but most of my adult life, I had zero interest in gambling. I consider it a tax on the mathematically challenged. But I remember being at the Paris hotel in Vegas for this event and going through, and they have the roof painted like sky, and they pump in oxygen and alcohol so you don't know if it's day or night. And they keep you gambling 24/7. And as you walk through, you see these people like sitting there smoking with oxygen, and they can barely move, and they're sitting there plugging. And I'm like, and you want to spend your life doing that? And you think why wouldn't you do that and then repent on your deathbed? To truly understand what God offers us and a life full of abundance through submission to him, the abundance that you're describing in your work, and the joy that you receive every day going to work by living to the best of your ability according to God's commandments.
Amen. That's all I can say. Amen to that.
The idea that somehow, Satan's pleasure ground, right, is a way that you would choose if you could just get away with it. No thanks. I mean, and again, I saw how my sister lived, right, and others that I've known who think, who are deceived into thinking that any of that somehow brings you joy or happiness.
And unfortunately, that's a lot of the way the world we live in, But
yeah, but in terms of,
I'm glad I'm not on that treadmill.
in terms of,
that's all I gotta say.
whether we're born again or not, Jesus, to me, the answer is simple, Angela. And sorry, I got to showing my age here. Angelo, not Angela. Angelo. Here's my take on that. And it is, Jesus spoke in parables, right? The parables of Jesus are renowned. A lot of people don't know why he spoke in parables, because his disciples asked him why he spoke in parables. And the average person who hasn't really looked at it thinks, well, to make the meaning clearer, stories make the meaning so much clearer. Stories are memorable. Jesus used parables to get his point across. No, he didn't. He answered them and said, I speak in parables to fulfill the prophecies of Isaiah, which say they will hear and not hear. They will see and not see. He spoke in parables so they would not know what he was talking about. He spoke in parables to kind of confuse them. Why? Well, partly because they were trying to kill him. And he spoke in parables so they wouldn't be able to accuse him, because they didn't really know what he was saying and they couldn't pin it down. And then he said, it is not given to them to understand, but to you it is given to understand. And then he proceeded to explain the parables to them, what they meant, and they still didn't get it. Peter denied him 3 times, right? Because he didn't understand what was going on. And so the analogies and the metaphors and the similes and the parables of born again. What does that even mean to be born again? Nicodemus said, what? I'm supposed to enter back into my mother's womb? And Jesus says, truly I say unto you, unless you're born of the water and spirit, you cannot. Well, what does that mean? That's why some people say, well, you must be baptized. We believed in full water immersion and the laying on of hands. And you didn't receive the Holy Spirit until the hands were laid on you and it was prayed over. That's one way of interpreting some of these analogies. The bottom line, to the point we've made, we don't really know exactly. And to try to nail it down in some theological dogma just leads to judgment and condemnation and ultimately accusation. You're doing it the wrong way. You don't understand. Whose job are we doing then? Well, Satan is the accuser of the brethren. So to try to lock these things down and pass these judgments on right and wrong on some of these things, it's just not productive. What exactly does it mean? I said it means begotten because the Greek word genao is often translated begotten. I could be wrong. I could be totally wrong. But it's the way that I understand it, is that we're impregnated with the Holy Spirit and we're growing in grace and knowledge. We're developing the spiritual qualities. And when we die, we are born again. That's how I understand it. Your mileage may vary and you may be absolutely right. And I'm sure God will honor you, because in Matthew it says, you will be judged not by others, not by Satan. You will be judged by God based on the standard you use to judge others. So if we're going around trying to lock this down and, be very rigid and maybe judge other people, it's like you said, Scott, you don't want to know who is or isn't giving 5%. Because why burden yourself with that knowledge? It's not your business. It's between them and God. And we all know we would tend towards judgment.
What I love about Jesus, and I'll just leave with this last thing. I love the parable when he says about give unto Caesar what is Caesar's and give unto God what is God's. And that, I love that because, and I'm a construction guy and I may get in trouble for saying this, so I apologize, but Jesus was a badass,
Well, he was a construction guy. He was a construction guy.
Yeah, he was the tough guy. He was the tough guy. And people,
give me that whip, because I'm going to chase those money changers out of the temple. Crack that whip.
And ultimately, it did get him killed, and it's that lack of that warrior mentality is just intriguing to me beyond belief, and I hope.
But combined with so much love and compassion and
absolutely, yes.
Yeah, full of all these qualities and in balance, to know when and how to be this versus that.
It is amazing. Yeah, I wish I could. Once again, I wish I could wrap my arms around it or put them in my pocket, but it's not that easy.
Well, Scott, thank you so much for being here. What else do you have as far as parting words to leave with our audience? And if they want to get in touch with you, if they want to hit you up for some of that, donation money, or just reach out to you, somebody here, and let me go ahead and post this comment. Somebody said they wanted to build a Christian company. And like I said, here we go. And I'll copy this and give it, but Leah Bishop, I want to open a Christian company. Do you have any recommendations for how to start? We can't get into that right now, but how does Leah get in touch with you?
Well, the best thing to do is just get on my website. Email is the best way to reach me. And I do help.
And that website is what exactly? Sorry.
Is ace-consulting.net. And so just ACE, a little hyphen -consulting.net. And my email address is on there.
So ace hyphen consulting?
Yes.
Okay. So I'm going to post this real quick. I've just sent it out to all of our channels. I'm going to post it here so people can see it. Email Scott, Ace Consulting. .new. No. ace-consulting.net. And what was your email address, if you don't mind?
It's SARIAS@TACEG.net.
TACEG?
EG, yes. So it's.
Let's see if this is correct.
And so, if anybody who's interested in reaching out to me, reach out to me. I'll be more than happy to part with some of my time or my treasure or my talent in an effort to help others because of my love for Jesus.
Well, Scott, thank you so much. And I hope we can have you back on the air again to talk more. It's just been truly a pleasure to get to know you and have you share the great stuff that God is doing with you, both the triumph and the tragedy, and truly an amazing story. We have. Is there anything else you want to leave the audience with? Otherwise, all we got to do is do the sneak peek for next week.
No, I think I'm good. Just like I said, if you wanted, you could always reach out to me. I'll be more than happy to help.
Awesome. And if you can hang on and listen to the sneak peek, it's probably 3, 4, 5 minutes, and I can chat with you afterwards after we're off air. But Scott, thank you so much. What an honor, what a pleasure, what a privilege to get to know you. Thank you again for your service then and now. With that, we'll go to the sneak peek, and we'll see you all there next week. Until then, may God be with you. Hey everyone, it's Wade Franson back with another sneak peek. We have an amazing guest today. You won't believe this man's story. I have in the studio with me Gunnar Lindblom, who is a former mafia enforcer who spent 13 years in prison, met the love of his life through thousands of letters back and forth, and eventually became a best-selling author. Welcome to the studio, Gunnar.
Hey, thanks, Wade. Thanks for having me.
So, do you get tired of telling this story and sharing it with people?
No, not really. I mean, because I know it can inspire people. I know it can, and that's the mission. That's the reason it all happened. That's the reason God put it in motion. That's the reason God facilitated it. And people are like, man, dude, you lived a tough life. I'm like, that's the life God chose for me. And so I'm making the most of it, as to use it for my great commission and my mission. So I don't really get tired of it. I know it's entertaining and interesting to a lot of people.
Well, and it seems like you've obviously made a degree of peace with who you were prior to your reconnecting with God. We recently this week, in fact, had Lane Lawson Craft on, who focuses on prodigal sons, prodigal children, prodigal sons and daughters returning to their parents and returning to God. Do you consider yourself a prodigal son?
I don't. I mean, maybe in some sense, but I was never like close to God but only thing I can say is I did know God was real. I do remember knowing the Holy Trinity when I was young. I debated with my uncle when I must have been 6, 7 years old, that Jesus and God were the same person, and he was trying to say they aren't. I was saying they were, and so I knew something. And so, but when I went astray in my life, or later on in my life, I never felt like I was part of the flock, or I was a son of God in any way. I just was a scumbag, really. And then when he came to me, but I did know he's real. I had several supernatural experiences that made me definitely believe God was real. I had no doubt. So, and then when I finally came to realize that he's seeking me out, it was time to give up the other life and pursue him.
Well, I can't wait to dive in deeper to all of these topics with you. We'll have a full hour in the studio, and it'll be live on July 8th at 8 p.m. Central on Created in the Image of God with former Mafia enforcer Gunnar Lindblom. You don't want to miss that episode. We'll see you there.